Hi, Dan. My name is Corey McGregory. I'm one of our career counselors here at the university, and primarily I work with a lot of our HSH students as well as our veterans on campus. It's a pleasure to meet with y'all and just we have some good stuff for y'all this week through the Boots to Suit series. Today we'll be starting off talking about translating military experience to civilian experience. So we'll really be jumping in pretty headfirst into the resume and talking a lot more about that. Just to quickly go over some of the materials I had over here. One of them is a resume guide that I drafted up, just has a lot of the foundational basics that if you feel like I'm not really sure how to draft a strong professional resume, this is going to have some good content for you. Also have one that I pulled from a couple of different sources that's all about actually translating some of that military experience on the resume. So it just picks up some common terms, almost acts like a thesaurus, giving you ideas for what are some terms I can maybe translate this into, so civilian employers will be a little bit better able to recognize some of that content. There was also a QR code here. Now I would have printed this off, but would have killed too many trees doing that. The document itself is like 26 to 32 pages, somewhere around there. So really just printed off a QR code for y'all. Now this document right here is from the Transition Assistance Program. It's a great veteran resource guide that deals with everything career. So this will be another great supplemental document. A couple other pieces. So this one right here, sample federal resume. Today, a lot of the content we're covering can be applicable to federal resumes, but if you are looking at jumping into, more of that federal atmosphere, working for the government, then you're really going to be looking more at a federal resume. That's not really something we're diving too deep into today, but I wanted to provide a handout that would supplement the content we go through so that you can feel confident and comfortable navigating that process. And if you are going federal in your route with your career and you feel like this is a good party starter, we can always meet and follow up one-on-one and talk about how do we further build out that federal resume. Last thing and most exciting is the survey. So after our meeting today, if you can, please fill out the survey. We really do use this information. It helps me get a sense of where y'all at. And how has this presentation help y'all towards your goals? So, if there's stuff we can change or optimize, this gives us insight into that we need to rethink some stuff. So we definitely use the data. All right, so we'll just jump right in. Like I said, this is really going to be honing in on the resume piece of career readiness. There we go. So I always like to start with, what is your resume? Let's get some of this off the screen there. All right. So what is your resume? Foundationally, I think one of the major things is I really want you to rethink what a resume is, because so many times I meet with students and they have one mindset about what it is, which shapes how they craft it. And it's not always a beneficial route. So I want you to think about, and this one may feel pretty intuitive, a resume is a thing that supports your candidacy for a role. And, when you're thinking about, I'm going to go apply for this job, I need to have a strong resume, that part's usually pretty intuitive. I think it's the implications of what this means that, people don't always follow that rabbit down the rabbit hole to really explore what does my resume really need to be about. This is the one that I often catch people on. It's not an autobiography. I think a lot of people get stuck on, I have to put everything I've ever done ever into this document, just crammed in there. And the problem with that is it's a marketing piece. I used to work at Chick-fil-A. Yeah, it was my pleasure. And I used to work at Chick-fil-A, but that's not on my resume anymore. And that's because it's not an autobiography. It's not about everything I've done. It's about the brand. It's about the marketing piece. What message am I trying to send? So for me, I have lots of other higher education, experience that sells this message that's my brand. I'm a higher education professional. I'm a career services professional. So as you're thinking about what does my resume need to look like? How do I communicate effectively to employers? Again, I want you to evaluate. Is my resume looking more like an autobiography, or is it telling a story? Is it sending a message that this is exactly what I'm looking for, and this is what makes me qualified for this specific role? All right, so what to include? So some pretty common things we want to be sure makes the cut on your resume. Of course, name and professional contact info. We need to know who to contact. I really emphasize professional contact information just because, there's been a number of times, obviously phone numbers, okay, names typically fine. It's the email that usually gets people. People are like, well, I check, Purple Dragon 27, at yahoo.com. That may be an email you use regularly, but is that really an email that sends a positive message to the employer? Sort of an exuberant example, but really just an action call to be sure that, what's the message I'm sending with even little things like my contact info. LinkedIn profile URL, which we'll kind of dip a little bit more into whenever we do the workshop on Thursday, we'll dip a little bit more into LinkedIn, profile building, how to use it very effectively. But a LinkedIn profile URL can be a good thing to put on your resume as well. And then we also, of course, have education experience, the content, the meat and potatoes. What's the stuff that really builds up my candidacy for this? And then lastly, we have licenses, certificates, and skills and accomplishments. So just some highlights. And of course, a lot of that stuff is also in the resources provided to y'all as well to help guide you. So things not to include. So, we have some things like height, weight, age, race, religion, a lot of these things, you can probably figure out the pattern between those types of things. Discrimination. We want to make sure that content's not on a resume because we don't want to open ourselves up to discriminatory practices. Just because it shouldn't happen doesn't mean that it doesn't. Height and weight, they don't even know. They don't even know all of this really. Photos and images, that's one we see a little bit more often. It's just generally employers say it's just not necessary. It can even mess up applicant tracking systems, which is something we'll cover in a bit. But it's just advised against. High school information, unless a freshman, that's another standard. Employers, they want to know what's the more current stuff that you're doing as well. So generally speaking, we usually recommend cutting high school info. Reason for termination, if you were working at Chick-fil-A too and you stole a nugget off the nugget line, got fired, employers don't need to know, right? I don't see that one as much, but it's worth noting. So just some good things to keep in mind. So top types of resumes. So there are different styles to resumes, and if you Google resume online, you'll probably see splashes of these different styles. So I'm going to mention a couple, but we're really going to hone in on one specifically. So reverse chronological, that's really one of the most recommended versions, and really no matter whether you use the reverse chronological or the hybrid one, which I'll look at here in a minute, you really want to be sure the content is reverse chronological, just because as an employer and someone who's, I've worked on hiring committees, and I can tell you as an employer, you're looking through the resume pretty quick, especially if you have a stack of 30, 60 plus, right? You're going to be going through those resumes very quickly. So it's very important that your resume is very easy to read, and just traditionally reverse chronological, very easy for employers to just kind of digest that info and look at it very quickly. Functional. I would say 99.99% of times we usually don't recommend functional. There's a good amount of issues with that style, and we'll look at examples of some of these here in a minute. But just know at this point, we do not recommend functional as a general rule. And then the hybrid, which it takes a little piece of the functional, is primarily reverse chronological in design, but it kind of has those benefits of both areas in a sense. So there's also federal and CV. Federal, already kind of talked about it. Federal resumes, you're really only going to see that for government work. It is a different beast. Government's nosy. They want to know everything. So it's basically a resume, but they ask a ton more. CV, you're really only going to need that if you're pursuing research or academia as like a faculty member or professor. That's usually when you'll see CVs pop up. Again, We're really not going over CVs today, so if that is a route that you're really looking at or considering, feel free to reach out. I did bring my business card, so I'm happy to send you a template that we have, just kind of gives you tips on CV building, but then can also meet one-on-one for that as well. All right. So looking at the functional resume, so this is just kind of an example right here. Now the functional resume, it's really a skill-focused resume. Listing out some pros and cons for it. I mean, one good piece is that it really brings those skills up to the forefront, kind of brings that summary up. That way it's a quick snapshot. Now, a couple of problems with this is that historically the style is not as easy to read as reverse chronological is. It's also not as ATS compliant or applicant tracking system, which I'll go into that more in a moment. As a trend, just kind of hearing straight from employers, it's just not generally a preferred resume. And one of the cons is that often these styles will lack specific information that employers are really looking for. I think, and they may kind of vary, but I think one of the biggest things I see is that a lot of times dates may be missing, or it'll be so focused on skills that it's just a little harder to know where were those skills really actualized, how much experience do you have with those skills. So it has pros, but I think the cons typically outweigh some of those pros for this style. Reverse chronological. So this is chronologically focused. So this one is really all about making sure the most recent information I have is outlined towards the top, moving down to the more older material. It's a great structure, typically more preferred by employers. It's a pretty easy layout to read for most. Now, again, we'll go into it more in a minute, but this style does lend itself well to applicant tracking system compliance typically. The only con with this style is that it may vary the skills section sometimes, which depending on what roles you're pursuing, that skill section being higher can have some benefits. Which you'll typically see that a little bit more in more technical jobs that you're pursuing, like, if you're pursuing something where there's more like computer skills, or maybe you need to list out programming languages or stuff like that, it can be pretty good to snapshot that higher up. Which brings in a hybrid model. So really functionally looks almost the exact same of the reverse chronological. It just really boosts the skills up. So what this is trying to do is it's trying to bring both worlds together, where it is boosting up the skills section higher, helping you have almost that like skills focused mindset, but otherwise it's still in the really same format of that reverse chronological. So kind of doesn't really have the weaknesses of either, has the benefits of both. And again, this does tend to lend itself more towards applicant tracking system compliance. All right, so applicant tracking system. So who here is familiar with the term applicant tracking system? Knows what that is? All right, we got some folks. Okay, so most people don't, unless you are a career counselor or HR professional or someone that deals with hiring. So applicant tracking systems, basically what they do is they look at your resume, they look at the job posting, and they try and see how much of these things really match up. And, they're designed, originally they were designed because, people adopted this practice of just, sending out their resume everywhere. And this is kind of the defense against that. It makes sure that if a resume really doesn't line up with what they're looking for, then it won't really make it through the system to get to human eyes. So instead of screening through like 200 irrelevant resumes, I'm looking at 30 that really have that certain percent match that we're looking for. So that has a couple of different implications to it. All right, get there in a second. Really and truly, one big thing that as a career counselor, I'm always telling students I work with dealing with resumes is tailor your resume. And I think a lot of times that's just viewed as, oh, that's just kind of a classic statement you're just kind of saying, or a slogan. But I mean, this proof is in the pudding. This is another reason why. There's the psychology of it. As an employer, if I see a resume that feels tailored towards that specific job, that's selling the message that I'm not just looking for a job, I'm looking for this one, then the psychology of that is very positive. But it's not just psychology, it's the applicant tracking system. And so I'll go over some strategies and tools that kind of help with that as well, make sure we kind of have that alignment. So it really begs the question, what's some of the stuff that gets in the way? Because the real truth is, it's not just if the keywords line up or not. These are databases, these are programs. So they depend on certain parameters through computers. So they have rule sets, which also means they have flaws. And there are some things that can really throw them off. So I mean, you could be a great candidate, even be the most qualified for the job, but if you're not formatting your resume correctly, it may be getting caught up in this program and not even making it to human eyes. So we'll go through some of this material, and this is updated as well. We recently heard from an applicant tracking specialist. I want to say like 4 or 6 months, somewhere a little bit ago, we heard from an applicant tracking specialist who kind of updated us on the trends. What is this currently looking like now? So what gets in the way? Of course, not using exact keywords. And a lot of these times, it's a computer program. They're not great with synonyms. You and I may know that there's a great similarity between supervised and managed, but unless, like if the job posting says managed and they don't say supervised, unless it's coded to know that supervised is the same thing, which is usually not, it won't necessarily understand that those are the same thing. So it won't equate that as a percent match. So trying to use those exact keywords when you can. PDF. So recommended not to submit a PDF unless specified to do so otherwise. Historically, based on what I've seen, whenever an employer says to submit in PDF, usually what they'll do if they're using an applicant tracking system is right after you upload the resume, they'll do that funny little thing where they're like, okay, now list out all your experience in all these boxes, your education, all these boxes. So usually what that is, those boxes are the ones that are kind of filtering that info into the applicant tracking system, and your resume may just be for the hiring committee to review. So again, general rule, submit in Word document, not PDF unless specified otherwise, just to be on the safe side there. So be sure to try and stick with, 1/2 inch to 1 inch margins. If you're using Microsoft Word, that's going to be your normal margins or your narrow margins. That's kind of that sweet spot there. This one was a little bit surprising. This one I think we all got an update on whenever we heard from that specialist. Using italics can sometimes be a problem. Bold is fine, but italics can sometimes be an issue for some of these programs. Not keeping everything left aligned. So really, besides the header, we do recommend try and keep everything else left aligned. Not using 10 to 12 font. Again, this one also speaks to the computer system. As someone who is rapidly aging, I can tell you if it's beneath 10, it's too small. So that's kind of another piece as well. No pictures, images, icons. So it's also not just some bald guy in front of you saying, hey, don't use pictures. It has its roots also in applicant tracking system compliance that, pictures can really throw it off. Now, icons and images, that's really talking about like if you use, let's say your bullets in your resume, you kind of use these exotic, crazy bullets to help it pop, right? Add some personality to it. There's a chance that using stuff outside of really the default bullets could really throw off these programs. As a general rule of thumb, what I tell people, if it's on the keyboard, it's generally okay for the most part. But yeah, avoiding pictures, images, and icons is a big piece. So these are the font types that are a little bit more safe for applicant tracking systems. When you go outside of that, you kind of increase the chances that it may cause issues. But Arial, Times New Roman, Calibri, Georgia, and Tahoma, those all are typically just fine. All right, so this is another one that surprises people, and I think this is the one that gets people in trouble when they use Microsoft Office templates. Is I have yet to see a Microsoft Office template that didn't break this guideline right here. They all tend to use tables and columns and hidden structures to try and organize the info on it. And the resume may look nice, it may have a cool design, but the fact is it uses a lot of these types of things to help organize the data, organize the info. So just as an example for columns, a lot of times what may happen with columns is the applicant tracking system may read the first column, and if you have a second one, it may not pick that one up. So best to really avoid those entirely if possible. All right, and color. So color usually comes up as a question. Honestly, color is not an issue for applicant tracking systems. Now, that being said, it's still recommended to try and again, think about what's the professional branding here. Generally, it's recommended that if you have to use color, no one's going to stop you. You want to be sure to try and keep it more conservative. So I would probably recommend a really dark blue. I've seen some super dark greens that worked, but I certainly wouldn't use anything super crazy that pops. Again, usually when people use that, it's because they want to have personality in their resume. And I think that, the best route is to really go full blast towards the content. Let the content speak for who you are as a candidate. We don't have to depend on things like, colors and little styles. So finding the keywords. All right, so when we're trying to find keywords, of course, there's really no beating hard work or rolling up our sleeves, getting the job posting, getting my resume, and trying to see how do I get these things to line up. And when I'm working with students, I'll literally go through the job posting and I'll ask, okay, here's the first bullet they're saying. I read it out. Do we have that? Do we have anything like that? If not, can we? Can we add that to one of your experience points? And I just go through, and it takes more time, but I have found that process, of course, to be some of the most beneficial. And if you feel like maybe that's something I can use assistance with, I do resume appointments all across the board developmentally. I meet with people who have never made a resume before. I meet with people that, they feel good about their kind of foundational resume, but they want some help tailoring it to a specific job. They come in with a job posting and a resume, and we both get to work trying to see what we can do with it. So we can always do that one-on-one to help with that process too. So this is a good website to know about, JobScan. I believe this puts a limitation on how many times you can do this. So it's sort of a glass cannon. You want to make sure it counts when you use it. But what JobScan does is it has boxes on the website where you can copy and paste the job posting and the resume, and it will give you an idea of what does the percent match look like. Like I said, last time I checked, I don't remember exactly how many times you can do it, but it is limited last I checked. So again, if you're going to use it, be sure it's something that you're really serious about and want to check out. So word clouds, a lot like this. So word clouds, now a word cloud does not, it's not a workaround for just the hard work of manually reviewing and comparing the job posting in your resume. But it can be a good kind of like final defense of, after I've gone through, reviewing my resume and the job posting, trying to make sense of it, make this thing work, you could always go to some type of word cloud website. This is just an example of one, word it out like this one. You can copy and paste the job posting in there. What it will do is it will create a word cloud that shows what are the most repeated words in this job posting. So it's kind of like a way to catch, did I catch all the keywords? Because you may be skimming past some that are really important and you're just like, oh, I'm hitting all these other keywords. So again, it doesn't take the place of, manual review and doing that hard work, and it can be a good way to add some polish. All right. So any questions at this point on the content we've covered so far? All right, if you're like me and you come up with questions after a meeting, you're always welcome to read it. There we go.
Can we go back to the other slide? I wanted to take a picture.
Do it. You want to take a picture of the robot?
Thank you.
I know, he's cute. I was happy when I found him.
All right, I got a bunch of questions. Sorry.
Let's do it.
You know better. How many word variations are we trying to put in? Like you mentioned the synonym thing. And
Yeah.
let's say I find 3 or 4. Do I want to use all 3 or 4? Or do I want to just use the main one? What's the opinion?
I guess explain to me a little bit more. What do you mean by variations we're trying to look for?
Okay, so like if the job, well, let's use manage, right? Okay,
Yeah.
so if the job says manage and you want to use variations of synonyms for manage, do you want to do that or do you not? Is it going to pick up the variations, in other words? Or do I need to stick with just the word manage all through? Because that reads poorly to me from my
Right.
literary mind. I
think-
manage this, I manage that, I manage that.
I agree. I think there's a balance too, that you're balancing the aesthetic, but also making sure that you're getting hits. I think, you know, my way into that would be just, you know, make sure that managed is in there somewhere, right? That we're not just going the other way and saying supervised, led, kind of, you know, playing around managed. But I do think you're correct, because we're not just talking about getting past a machine.
Right.
We're also talking about, you know, when it does make it to a hiring manager, it's gonna be harder for me to read through a resume that just says managed like 20 times. So I think there's a balance to it. Yeah.
And is there any data on the number of hits? You know, in other words, if I use a keyword 12 times, is that better than somebody that used it 6 times? Does ATS really care? That's always kind of intrigued me, so.
That is a good question. I honestly don't have the answer to that specifically. I do know that from my understanding on applicant tracking systems, they all do typically have like different styles with how they compile the data, but I don't know if any of them.
I'm sure there's an algorithm. I just didn't know if somebody had
Yes.
broke the code.
And actually, so a human being sets the protocols and this, so if I'm a recruiter and she's a recruiter, I may say, I don't really care about keywords. I want to know that this person has leadership experience. And she says, I only care about keywords. So a human being setting those standards, as well as your comment about when students say, well, I can't keep saying this. I can only think of this word to say this. My recommendation is there's more to you than just that one word. So pick other functions, but bring your top one to the top and then everything else.
No, I'm aware of that. I just was wondering, because we're so data driven, you know, we analytics on everything, and is there like a sweet spot is what.
Yeah, what is it, LinkedIn Recruiter, which is a package people buy. I went to a webinar and the LinkedIn Recruiter people and the employers were there, and the employers had different reasons for how they use LinkedIn Recruiter. Some of them said, yeah, the algorithm brings them, these are the top 3%. Some of the recruiters were like, we don't care about that. We care about this and this, so we'll throw in stuff. So I think it still varies because a human being is entering those, you know, those parameters and that criteria.
Absolutely.
And do we still, I guess, obvious, is that objective statement, is that really, to me, that just wastes a couple lines, right? If I'm applying for.
You felt it. You felt.
Yeah, because I've done enough resumes and I'm like,
Yeah.
this is just, if I'm applying to be a teacher, obviously my objective is to get a job as a teacher. It's kind of self-explanatory. All right, and then my last one, how far back do we go for licenses in our skills section? Like if I was, like I'm an Avid certified when I worked at Spring, but I haven't recertified in I don't know how many years. So I worry that does it look bad? I guess what I'm asking is, does it look bad if I got a 10-year-old certificate on there versus just saying I don't have that anymore?
And I wish I had a black and white statement.
Well, no, I know it's not black and white. I'm just,
Right.
what's your opinion?
I think it's again, just kind of asking that question of, how does it speak to the narrative, right? Like you know, I've seen students where, you know, they have lots of experience that's further back, whether it's certifications or just work experience, or whatever that looks like. And they still list it on the resume, but I'm like, it doesn't really speak to the message, and it is older, so employers may not view that as relevant. But I've also seen someone, like I looked at a resume with someone, you know, going through an accounting degree, and they had accounting related experience that was like 15 years ago. And if we just followed a rule of, we just cut it automatically, you know, if it's like 10, you know, arbitrarily like 10 years old, get rid of it, then we may be losing out on some of that experience that we can kind of pull on. So I think, you know, you may get different schools of thought on it, but I think my way in would just be, again, evaluate it. Does it speak to the narrative? Is it relevant? And, you know, what story is it telling by keeping it there versus not? Because if we're keeping irrelevant info on the resume that really doesn't speak to that message, we risk diluting the message entirely. So.
And just a comment anecdotally,
Yeah.
right? I've been a federal hire, right? And I don't know if you've seen a Resumex or federal resume spit out from a machine, but they are normally 10, 12, 15, 20 pages long. And I will say, even if it gets you 3% of 100 candidates, that's still a lot of 20-page resumes to look at. And I found, and just from experience, we tended to rely more heavily on the interview at that point, right? We trusted that Resumex gave us the top people, probably too much, but we did just to save time. And then we would go to the interview because the hiring practice mandated you had to interview X number for it to be a valid interview. And we would rely on that more. And then when we came to the who we want to pick, we'd have that tally sheet, and then we would go to the resume and look for highlights on the resume, because it's too much to look at. Like you said, it's just a lot so that's a completely different animal, and I agree with you. You got to look at that completely differently from a regular.
Well, I feel like the message behind that is the same, and I feel like you see it differently when you work on a hiring committee, because then you really experience that of how quickly employers really look through this the first go around. So that's why it's so important to not only, look at what is how do I navigate applicant tracking systems, but how do I kind of also apply to the psychology of the employer, what they're looking for, marketing myself effectively. Thank you for those.
Problem.
So the objective section. So the big question was, are they really necessary? And the truth is that they're very optional. I think in my work with students, I've really only recommended objective sections if they had a bunch of white space and it was just an easy way to kind of add a little bit more content. But, I've also seen plenty of other resumes where they're like, I'm pushing to 2 pages and I really can't cut anything else. And then they have this objective taking up like 2 or 3 lines that we can easily, help make that happen. So I think it's about the greater ecosystem of what the resume looks like, whether or not we have it. If you do have it and you say, hey, I do have some extra space, I do think it can kind of help kind of balance out what my resume looks like, I would definitely recommend crafting it to be very specific to the place you're pursuing. Again, trying to use those keywords of, I might say something like creative and passionate individuals seeking the career counselor position at University of Houston Clear Lake to promote career development programming and engage in career counseling with students. So it may be something like that. Like I wouldn't write a dissertation on it, but it hits a couple of key points that this is the job I'm going for. This is the place I'm looking for, and this is what I want to contribute. And I think that last part is another important piece. If you do go the route of adding this, to lean into how am I going to contribute? How do I contribute to what you're looking for? Because that's what they're looking at. So if you're already using that language, then you're kind of making that easier on them to kind of evaluate it from that standpoint. Now, all that TED talk to say that, again, I really only recommend this if you are, have an extra white space. So education section, pretty straightforward, just a good way to kind of lay it out and design it right here. Also in the packet that y'all have, listing out the university, the degree type, which I would bold. I might even, I should have edited this. I might even say the degree type above, kind of swapping UHCL and the degree type may be a good move too. Major, minor. Now, relevant coursework, that's kind of another thing. There are a couple points with this I think are worth kind of sitting with for a minute. Relevant coursework can be a good way to kind of show off extra relevance. So if you're somebody that you feel like, I really don't have a lot of relevant experience besides the education I'm pursuing, listing up to 6 courses can be a good way to kind of increase that relevance on your resume, help market yourself. Now, just to be clear, whenever I say relevant coursework, be sure you're listing out the course titles, not necessarily the course numbers, because I have seen those resumes before where someone lists out the course numbers, and unfortunately, employers wouldn't really know what that means for the most part. Now, month, year, I think this is big because this section is really different from experience. Experience, they want to know how long you were at a place, right? For education, are people taking the extra year lap or whatever will rejoice at this comment, but they only want to know, when are you done or when did you earn it? So we only really have to put anticipated month, year. We don't have to put how long we were at that specific program. All right. So the experience section. So I'm gonna, for the sake of time, I do also want to get to some of the other pieces. So I'll probably go through this one a little quicker. Good rule of thumb, start with action verbs, keep it fresh. Again, we're talking about the psychology of the employer. You know, it's gonna be harder for me to look through a resume that just says helped, assisted like 20,000 times. Like, it's just good to kind of shake it up. There is a page in the resume guide, because this is something that I still have to look at that page to help me, because I don't have an internal thesaurus, but it actually lists out a bunch of action verbs. So if you can start off by knowing that this skill I'm thinking about, this verb is really a kind of a leading verb, a management type verb, then you can look under that section in there and you can find what different words you can maybe plug in there. Listing duties and phrases. So trying to shy away from more of a narrative format where it's a paragraph. It's crazy. I've seen resumes where it's like the same content narrative, same content, you know, in bullets, comparing them. And the bullets are just so much easier to read, even though it's the same content. There's something about that bulleted form that just makes it easier to scan through. Being consistent with grammar and tense, that goes back to professional, image. You know, what's the brand? If you add a period or not, there really is no rule that a period in your bullets or not is right or wrong. It's really just about being consistent. It's a thankless job. If you put a period at the end of all your bullets, an employer may not be like, wow, look at this consistency. They added a period at the end of every sentence. But if you have pretty equal qualifications with someone else and theirs is very grammatically, it's tight, it just looks the same, very consistent, and yours has like a period here, not there, small little errors, then you're kind of giving them an easy way to count you out compared to this other person. So it's just a good practice to think about. Get as close as you can get. That's what I always tell people. So me earlier talking about, reviewing the job posting, looking at my resume, if you didn't do a task specifically, how close can we get to that task and still be honest? Because that's really what we want to do. Because that's the best you can do. The best you can do is get as close as you can get with the info that you have to present. And then really trying to evaluate, especially if I'm listing out some of my military experience, how would that really present to someone from the civilian world who may not be as familiar with some of those terms? And of course, that one handout I gave y'all, the kind of the translator there, will also help. So going through building better bullets, again, there's another page on this in the guide that I provided to y'all. But just kind of having some probing questions. If you're somebody that you feel like I really struggle with bullet building and knowing how do I build stuff up, this can really be a good process that you can use and just kind of start with. So we start with, something simple like answered phones, right? And you think, how can I really build on that? Well, asking, looking at the goal, outcome, and success. So the goal, why did I do it? Why did I answer phones? To answer the phone and direct the call to appropriate staff. All right, well, what was the outcome or the result of it? Well, answered the phone quickly and efficiently. How to know is a success? Minimize the call or wait time. So we kind of get these little pieces of it. And if we mix those all together, we get something like redirected callers to appropriate staff quickly and efficiently to minimize call or wait time. So like I said, the examples in that handout, and if you do feel like this has kind of helped you start it, but you feel like you could use some extra work on building some of those bullets out, remember, like I said, we always have individual appointments that we can do with folks to kind of look at that together. All right, so trying to look at this, and I think John knocked me last time. I put some info that I forgot what it was, but I put down I don't know. Do you remember what? I don't remember. I want to say I put something that wasn't a leadership position, but the example that I found is had leadership experience or something. You're like, they don't do that. You can let me know if this is accurate or not. But here's an example of just kind of, here's something that may use a little bit more military terms, kind of starting out. And sometimes it's also not just asking, how do I directly translate content? Sometimes we need to evaluate, is this really content that I should be probably marketing as much? So another example of this that we may market otherwise is communicated time-sensitive information to designated parties quickly and efficiently, maximizing successful operations. Now, I would also recommend this, especially if you're going into more of a technical career, but even otherwise, a good addition you could make to this is if you have any numbers. like percentages and numbers or stuff like that. That can also be a good way to kind of add, meat to some of this bullet as well. But just evaluating, is there other stuff that I can be focusing on? So where do I start when we're actually talking about how do I translate military info to more civilian terms? I usually, as a process too, we start by listing out what were all the things I did in my military experience, trying to build awareness of, what was all the stuff? What did it look like? And then going back through and think about, not just what tasks I did, but what were some of the accomplishments I earned through that process? Maybe things like earning a promotion, executing, there we go, a new initiative, or assisting with training. So different pieces that you may be overlooking. And then another thing is, you have the specifics of what you did, but really think about what was the core functionality of it. And I think that's really at the heart of translating some of that content. So again, leaning into things like, was I supervising? Was I mentoring? Assessing inventory, things like that. And with all things, just ask yourself, is it relevant? What are the most relevant content from my experiences, and how can I prioritize that? How can I show that off effectively in my resume? So some resources that I have found really helpful towards this goal of helping, trying to translate this content is mainly military.com is pretty good, but I'm a huge fan of ONET. ONET has some really good functions here. So let me go ahead and pull this up. I believe I'm going to have to switch my screen share here. I'll just do the screen. Make that easy. All right. So whenever you go to this right here, and I believe that this link is on the back of the translation handout. I like QR codes too much, but it's right there at the bottom of the back of that page. You see a little QR code that'll actually get you to this website. So you can actually use this a couple of different ways, depending on where you're at, how you want to use it. One example is if you really have an idea what you're looking for. You know what? Let's just say you're inspired by this presentation today, career counselor. Love it. All right, so you can pull up kind of a quick rundown of what does this position really look like. So it's a good way. If you do find, not only am I using it for resumes, but I'm trying to explore different career options, this can be a great resource for that. But it can also give you ideas, and you can even select different branches of the military here. It'll kind of give you some ideas of different military-related roles that would really synergize well with this role. And even sometimes evaluate, like this on-the-job info, like maybe that's some stuff that I can evaluate. Is that stuff that maybe has good ideas for somewhat how I can reword different bullets, or maybe some skills and knowledge and stuff that I can show off a little bit more. And another good thing you can do is you can go to the bottom and see more details. And this again can be really good with like bullet building. If you feel like I need inspiration to give me an idea of what do I really start out with, I wouldn't just pull these directly, right? Because plagiarism, but you can use this as kind of a starting point of saying like, okay, I'm scratching my head. I have no idea what to even start with. Start with something like this. If you find that it's pretty accurate, start with this and figure out how do I make this mean, right? How do I make this more of a personal bullet that makes sense with my experience directly? So that's a really good resource right there. So that's one way you could do it. You can also play around with these different industries right here. So we'll just say finance, insurance. Again, this kind of lends itself as well more to the career exploration piece, but that's another functionality on this. And this is ONET, My Next Move, and this is specifically a resource for our veterans to assist them in this process. But great way to kind of see some different options there. And then even, let's just say, again, exploration wise, but also to help you find good areas to research. How do I build bullets? You can even use the military skills piece by just starting with, we select a branch. And I'm just going to use this one like examples. There we go. Yeah, you can just type in your military code and you can kind of see what some of the related stuff. So again, you can use this to just kind of investigate. Avionics technician looks cool, same process. We can look at this for ideas, but we can also scroll down, go to the more technical layout of the page and use that for inspiration for some bullet ideas that maybe I could throw into my resume. So that is going to be ONET to help you with the translation piece. The other one is military.com. Now I like this one because, kind of similar principle, right? Let's give Coast Guard some love. I don't think we've done anything with them. So I'm just going to type something in here. See, public affairs specialist, right? So you type, again, same principle, you can type in your branch, the different, different codes there, different things that you're looking for, and then it will pop up different ideas. Now what this is these are actually jobs, real time. So this can help with the job search, but it can also, again, give you ideas for, if I want to go into desktop publishing, if it ever loads, boom, I can evaluate maybe what are some types of bullets I can look at. So it's kind of a similar principle as if I'm actively engaging in the job search, comparing the job posting to the resume. But it's another good resource you can use to kind of explore those options, whether you're building the resume or engaging in the search. Right, any questions on those specifically? Okay. All right, so some other considerations, we're just gonna pop these up here. So, a message I've been really saying time and again is prioritize your bullets. It's not only looking at what does the full picture look like, but what's the most important stuff, and is that getting buried, right? Like there was a point when I was applying to a couple of different types of positions in my, I had the same experience, so I really had a foundational resume I started with, but I was applying to career counselor roles, academic advisor. There was a couple of coordinator type positions I was going for. And you can bet that my career counselor resume looked pretty different from the coordinator one. Same core experiences, but I changed how I prioritized bullets. My one-on-one experience with students was showcased a lot more on my career counseling side. And for those resumes, even my academic advising resumes, same thing, had a lot more of that student interaction. But then when I looked at the coordinator type roles, I was really gearing a lot more towards, here's my event building experience, my program development, assessing different programs, all of that was really pulled up on the bullets. So prioritize them. If you're looking at different roles, evaluate, do I need to shift how these bullets are really listed out? And then, of course, research the skills desired for the job of interest. So always be sure and do your research because, again, you want to send the message, I'm not just looking for a job, I'm looking for this one. And believe me, hiring, people that hire, they know when people have done their research, they can feel it. Strive for one page. So developmentally, you may see some differences there, but I think that's a good charge to try and keep it to one page. Developmentally, 1 to 2 pages can be somewhat common for undergraduate, depending on, what the experience looks like. 2 pages can, that can be pretty common for graduate students. Again, I think the guide for that, really why people say, 1 page, the 1-page rule, is because it's a charge. Make sure your resume is relevant. And I think that's the issue. I've met with students where they have quite a bit, quite a number of pages and the message gets diluted. So again, that's really why that page limit is there. And again, as an employer, I'm going to take anywhere from 15 seconds to 2 minutes to initially look at that resume the first time. So if I'm looking at a resume that's 1 page versus one that's like 6, one of them's going to be a little easier for me to go through, right? And then again, keep it relevant. Woo-hoo. So we already kind of went through this on the front end, but again, if you didn't grab all the resources, we have lots of great stuff up here for y'all. And if you can, did everyone get the survey as well? Okay. Yeah, so if you can, just go ahead. We're getting to the part where we'll have questions, but if you can go ahead and start just filling out that survey. I greatly appreciate the info for that. In summation for this, really what's next? What's next on the docket that we have here with the Boost to Suits program? So of course, today we talked about resumes, translating military experience. On Thursday, we're going to have the veteran job search workshop, and that's going to really do a deep dive into LinkedIn, specifically Should be really great, and that's gonna be over in the other building, SSCB, floor 3310. Not the third floor, there we go, not the 3,000th floor. And then the finale, the crescendo is gonna be on Friday. We're gonna have the kickoff and My Story panel where we'll bring veteran employers on campus. Be a great opportunity to network with employers and just hear a little bit more about their story going from, military career to civilian career and how they really navigated that process. And that will be back in the Bayou building, but it will be in the Forest Room as well. And then as far as drawings.
So lunch will be served. And also some of the employers are from you
Boeing,
and
Enterprise, Axiom,
Yeah.
yeah,
Sherwin-Williams.
Sherwin-Williams,
And
yes.
That's it.
and UHCL.
And UHCL, yes,
It's-
our own representative.
Representative.
Yeah, so lots of good employers you can definitely check out. Yeah, it'll be excellent.
And
Yeah,
then I was gonna say the prizes are, so if you attend this workshop, the one on Thursday and then Friday, we actually have, so right now there's 4 of you, you have a pretty good chance.
yeah,
But we'll have a drawing for a full interview set, brand new from either Men's Warehouse or Macy's for suit, for interview attire, brand new. It's part of the incentive,
yeah.
so there'll be a drawing. And
Looking
then-
pretty good right now.
Yeah, if you attend, and then also just for the panel on Friday, we have a UHCLC basket that you can get. So if you can't make it to Thursday, but you would still be able to win something, a basket on Friday.
And food, I'll throw that
And
out
food,
there.
yes,
I think that's what
And
we're-
everybody that's coming from those companies is a veteran and is very interested in meeting student veterans and military students as well.
Yeah.
So, sorry, Jason.
No, I just had a quick question. I should have asked it during the ATS section.
Yeah,
Is oftentimes when you're completing a job application, it asks if if you have a disability or if you have, I can imagine some veterans are concerned about answering these questions. Because some may have disabilities, some may not. Is it, it's recognized by the VA, some is that. Is there any concern in answering these questions? I know they always say it will not interfere with your job search and things
Right.
like that, but I'm assuming it is part of the ATS system when you answer those questions.
I don't think it says, I think it's, maybe the question is, will you require accommodations?
yeah,
Yeah,
Because you also have disabilities that you do not see. Right, so you may, so I think that maybe, but there's a lot of I can't imagine, I think. What we hear is more the concern around the interview questions rather than
yeah,
on record where you could sue someone.
I guess I'm thinking more of the demographics at the end, typically they ask, and it's optional input. I just always think sometimes people may be nervous about putting
Sure,
that info in
sure.
there.
Well, it's only optional in the one respect though, but because if you're claiming a veteran's preference, you have to put
Yeah.
your disability or your preference in there. Like specifically on the government jobs, what's My Jobs or whatever it's called. It rates you and you have to load up your VA letter or it won't let you take that preference. And that's separate from what she was saying, where you have to identify, I may need wheelchair access for the job kind of thing.
Right.
And on the USA jobs, that's optional whether you put that or not, but the other one is not. If you want to claim the 30-point preference or 10-point, whatever it is, you have to provide proof or it won't let you go past that point. When you go to submit, you'll get an X saying you're missing your VA letter.
yeah, I mean, as far as applicant tracking system, I really haven't myself heard of, the disability question really coming into play. Historically, it is mostly for, trying to, if there would be a need for accommodations or not for the most part.
Correct.
I think it's understandable to be, to have those types of concerns when you are applying, being nervous about, am I gonna get discriminated against or not? I will say from a disability perspective, there sure are a lot of laws protecting that.
Well, there are also like, my job prior to this one, I worked for the DoD in Saudi Arabia. And you had to pass a mobility screening physical before they'd even look at you, because you might be teaching in Saudi Arabia they may not have wheelchair access, so you couldn't have, you couldn't have a disability per se. That wasn't mitigated by like medication or something, and then it had to be, can we get that medication there? Cause you're gonna be there a year or whatever. Limited, but that's the only time I've ever seen it held against an applicant for the USA job. But it was clear, you must pass a pre-employment physical for mobility or whatever.
And you may get that where it's, it's a little bit more ingrained into whatever that role is. Yes,
Your thoughts on cover letters?
cover letters, I love them. I absolutely love them. So I will say, I mean, to be quite upfront, personally, I feel like, oh, submit a cover letter. I mean, if they don't ask for one, worst case, they won't read it. Right? But I've also have heard feedback from some employers that say like, oh, if we don't ask for it and you sent it, then you didn't listen to directions. So I kind of leave that I'll leave you to kind of figure out what pathway you really want to follow with that, just to full disclosure on how employers feel about it. The benefits of a cover letter is, a resume is very objective. It's here's the facts, here's the tasks of everything I've done. But a cover letter is very subjective and it can do some really good work with identifying, here are the things that make me a great candidate for this role in a little bit more subjective way. And if you are looking for help in how to build that on that resume guide that I made, I think the back page, it does have a cover letter example. So it kind of goes through what are really the highlights I need to be hitting to have that effective cover letter. Yeah, that's a good question.
Is it more of an autobiography then, like a cover letter would be? Or a story or?
It
matches the job. I'm the
Yeah.
hardest person on cover letters because if it's, what we were just talking about this, dear UH downtown, you're out. You got if you have a chance to mess up from then on, no matter how great your resume is, you're out. Because I'm on the search committee and you did not, your job search, you did not think enough to change it, right? If you're in an active job search, you're triple checking everything. But a cover letter will tell me either, because some people write extremely wonderful cover letters. And then the resume, it's like, this doesn't match, like who?
right.
So if it's your dream job, write a cover letter.
Yeah.
If you are so exceptionally qualified because you did exactly that, write a cover letter, because you can say, this here, I didn't look. If you make connections, if you're just fluffing it, it will look like you're just fluffing it.
Right.
So, and I know as students ask us all the time, like, what happens if I have no experience, but how am I ever gonna get experience in that field if I can't get a chance? Well, then find transferable skills, say very much like this. I think it's the not checking your information, sending the wrong one. It's like just automatic 50 points
Yeah.
deducted. And then also the trying to be over fluffy and not really, so it's okay that you don't have experience, right? But you have valuable experience doing other things. So
Yeah.
cover letter is tricky. It's very tricky.
It is. And of course, like a lot of this stuff, we do provide assistance with that.
Yes.
You wanna, like, if you wanna draft up a cover letter, you can send it to our career services email. We can take a look at it. If you wanna schedule an appointment with a career counselor, I'm happy to work with you on how do we further refine this if we need to. But I like to tell people this is Burger King. You can have it your way. So however you want that work to look, we can work together on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
The comment on like dear U of H downtown, was that like because you're saying if I applied somewhere else, are you saying I shouldn't address the entirety of the?
They did not, we are not UH
So it's a
downtown. They
different
didn't think
place.
I
that,
got you, okay.
they didn't
Yeah,
take
yeah,
the time to change.
Right.
And you
Gotcha.
can usually find the manager and that's, and maybe not the committee chair,
Yeah.
Right.
but I've seen it say committee chair and
Right.
the high, like the VP, if you're using higher education, the VP of student affairs, if you were, or something like that.
Well, and even like a lot of times even saying like dear hiring committee.
Right.
I
That's
don't-
probably-
because
that's the
I-
best one.
I'm on a hiring committee, but I'm also a career counselor, but
Yeah.
no matter who, like, you're on the hiring committee, you're the hiring manager.
Yes, and it's the lack of attention to the
Yes.
detail for a job that you supposedly want.
Okay.
And another is, can you tell me when somebody reaches out to a potential candidate for an interview and they say, yeah, can you remind me what job I applied for? Automatically,
Yeah.
once you're an active, have to keep track of the stuff you're applying to.
Remember, really the goal you want to keep in mind as far as what image am I wanting to present is the image that I'm not applying to a job, I'm looking for this one.
This is my,
And like, if I contact you saying, hey, you've been invited for interviews and you say, oh, can you remind me what the job description is? Immediately, I feel like you apply, this is a job, it's not the job that you're really looking for. And as an employer, I want to find someone who this is the job for them. So there's that piece. Same thing with the cover letter comment, like, you know, whenever you send the message that, you know, dear hiring committee, I'm applying to this position at this specific place, University of Houston, Clear Lake. But if I see on your cover letter, you say I'm applying for a different position that, you know, than we listed at
That's party committee.
oh, Toys R Us, I don't know. For me, I'm just like that, it goes completely the other way. I feel like, wow, it wasn't worth your time to make sure that the cover letter was, you know, it was tailored. And I've had occasions where I knew people where they're just like, I hit send and I couldn't edit it, and then I realized afterwards that it was the wrong place. So accidents happen, but the problem is, as a hiring person, I'm not in a place where I'm evaluating all the buts. I'm not arguing for why to keep people that maybe that was, you know, maybe that was an accident, maybe they actually mentioned something else. I'm actively looking for ways to chisel it down. So common errors like that, we just want to be sure and avoid it because you don't want to give employers an easy reason to cut you out. Yeah. Any other questions? Where did we get the pizza from?
campus dining,
There we go.
we're limited, sorry.
And with that, we'll end the recording.